Starting on Mr. Trump. Tell me how you learned of Mrs. Hill's problem, would you?
Well, I watched. It was a sad thing, and I watched on the news one night. I had just seen a woman, a wonderful-looking woman, a beautiful woman, whose husband had just committed suicide. And it was really very touching, and I said, look, we're going to save that farm. They were going to auction off the farm the next day. He had just committed suicide, and I said, we're going to save that farm.
Then what happened?
And then I called up Frank, who's really turned out to be a friend and a great friend, and we started working.
I want Mr. Argenbright to tell me what his reaction was when he got the call, what he said and did.
Well, it was unbelievable. I received a phone call. We had the press conference announcing that we were going to try to sell part of the farm to save part of the farm. And I get a phone call 11:30 at night from a gentleman who says, this is Donald Trump calling from New York. I would like to help.
You believe it?
I'm in the security business, and I didn't believe it. And he said, I said, I have to say I'm a little skeptical. And he said, I was sitting there watching it, and I said I ought to help. And my wife said, why don't you get up and call? And we talked a few minutes, and I realized who I was talking to. And it was a wonderful thing, and I called Mrs. Hill the next morning bright and early. I said, you're not going to believe who's willing to help you out. And then it was Donald's idea to say, look, don't sell the majority of the farm to save part. Let's go ahead and try to save the entire farm, which we never even hoped to do that.
Now, for some years I've wanted to interview Mr. Trump, but at the moment I find, you told me one thing that fascinates me. And that is that Mrs. Hill called you after her husband died. Tell me about that.
Well, I was involved in helping a black farmer named Oscar Lorick save his farm. And about that time that we were having trouble raising funds, Mr. Hill committed suicide. And I just wrote Mrs. Hill a note and said, I'm really sorry about that. I get a phone call from Mrs. Hill saying, I saw a press conference that you're having trouble raising funds. I would like to come up and help you. So she came up and spoke at several fundraisers trying to help us save Mr. Lorick's farm.
One other question. She does some teaching. Would you tell us about that?
Yeah, she works with the black community in her area that cannot write and read. She does she gives free instructions in teaching them how to read and write.
She's done that for a long time?
For a number of years. She does charity work and working with the youth in the area.
What kind of a woman is she?
She's a fantastic lady.
Mr. Trump?
Yes.
They say charity begins at home. I'm not talking about your empire. But what makes you do things like this?
Well, in the case of Mrs. Hill, I just saw a really special lady. I saw a very sad lady and a very special lady, and I think she's a very happy lady now, and it makes me feel good. You have to put back into the system. I've done well in the system. The system's been good to me, and I like to put it back. So whether it's Mrs. Hill or somebody else, I like to put back into the system.
Just one semi-political question. Of course, with all the money you have, if you tried to help all the people who are having problems, all the farmers who are having problems, you'd be broke in a few days, I believe.
Well, you really need the federal government. They have to step in. They'll give money to foreign countries that frankly can't stand us. They give money to Iran, which is hard to believe, and yet a Mrs. Hill and other people, they don't get any money, and I think it's crazy. I think that the federal government has to step forward. They have to come forward immediately and help the farmer.
Thank you. Merry Christmas, gentlemen.
Thank you.
And just a quick word over here. Sir, tell us a little bit about your farm and why you got involved.
Well, our farm used to be some 3,000 or 4,000 acres, and over the years we've had to sell off our property in order to pay off our bills because farming just wouldn't support it. We produced a good crop, but we couldn't get a proper price for it at market. And I certainly hope everyone will support the Harkin Farm Bill, untable the Stegall Amendment, repeal the windfall profits tax, and get an oil import fee so that all of agriculture and raw material producers in America can make a profit and we can pay off our $11 trillion national debt.
You sold off your farm, but you had other enterprises.
Well, no, we still have some of the farm left, approximately 400 to 500 acres, and then in the whole family, nearly 1,000 acres. But we've sold off the majority of it.
You're a wealthy man.
Yes, sir, I am.
Do you think there are many wealthy farmers left in this country, small farmers?
Not hardly any. The only way they've survived is by having their farm passed on from father to son and barely hanging on by their fingernails.
Thank you. Merry Christmas.
Good luck.
Thank you.
Good luck. Thank you.
Thanks very much.
The only thing
I'm just going to ask you a few questions. Tell me something.
All right.
We understand that you have for a long time, been teaching some people to read.
Yes.
Since when? You lose it, don't you?
Yeah.
I want you to tell me how long you've been teaching people to read. Tell me about them and why you do it and so forth.
Well, this has been a very difficult situation in that a suicide is very hard to deal with. You always feel like, well, could I have done something different? Could I have prevented it? And so I moved to Augusta because I just couldn't stay where I was. The memory just was with me all the time. So I moved to Augusta after 3 months to live with my youngest daughter. She and I have an apartment. And I was looking for something to do. I've always been very active, and I needed to be active again. And I saw in the newspaper where there was a plus reading program, project literacy reading program. And I thought, well, I can spend my time helping somebody else. And I used to teach school long years ago, and I thought, this is what I need to be busy doing, helping someone else. And in Richmond and Columbia County, in Augusta there were 60,000 illiterates that cannot read above a 5th grade reading level. And so I answered the ad in the paper and volunteered my services. And so they called and said they were going to have a training program and that I would have to attend 5 nights for a week, for 1 week, in order that I might learn how to teach this program, in which I did. And so then they gave me a student, which is a colored girl that's 27 years old. She had completed high school and reads on a 1st grade reading level. And you see, that's a real need. You see, there's so many people that can't read, and it's such a great handicap to them. They can't get a job. They can't even pass a driver's license test. And that was this problem with this girl. She wanted to drive, and she couldn't pass the test. And so I have her 2 days a week for 2 hours each day. And I started about in October, and it's just gone real well. And I've gotten so much satisfaction out of it. It's done so much for me. And it's helped her, and that makes me feel good. And it's occupied my time and my thoughts, and I needed to do that.
Can you tell me how you feel? Just wanted to ask you this. How do you feel right now, and what kind of a Christmas are you going to have?
A wonderful Christmas. I feel like with us having the land back again, it's a future for my family. It's a future for my son who loves to farm, and then for his family on down through the generations, where it would have stopped if this hadn't come to pass. He would have gone and done something else, and the Hill family land would have been gone forever.
Merry Christmas.
Thank you so much. I'm very grateful for what's happened.
Are you ready, Beth?
Okay.
Okay. I guess we have to start with what brought the story to your attention.
Well, I was watching television, and I happened to see a woman, a wonderful woman, who had just lost her husband to a suicide. And he committed suicide because he was about to lose his farm. His farm was about to be auctioned off, and I thought it was tragic. I thought it was tragic because of the fact that the backbone of this country is based on the farms, the great American farm system, and that system is right now in very serious trouble.
Do you think that there is a long-term solution?
Well, it's a government solution. There is a government solution, and the farmers have to be helped. They have to be helped on an economic basis. They can't make it right now. The prices are too low, their costs are too high, and they have to be helped on an economic basis. Eventually farming will be good again, but during this period of time when it's not good, you have to do something to help the farmers and the farms.
And you think this should come from the government or the private sector?
Well, the only way you can do it right now is through the government. It's too big a problem for the private sector. At this moment in time, you have hundreds of Annabelle Hills, perhaps not as tragic in the sense of the death involved, etc. But you even have that. the government has to get involved in solving the problems of the farmers. And if they don't do it quickly, you're not going to have much of a farm problem because you're not going to have very many farms.
Do you think others will follow your lead, other philanthropists?
Well, I hope so, but again, it's a bigger problem than individuals going in and helping individual families because they happen to see the tragedy of that family. The real problem is the overall problem, and it's a policy situation. The government has to set the policies that are going to allow the farms to survive.
I don't know if you know that Reagan has defended his subsidy program, saying it's the largest increase, larger than defense, larger than any other department during his administration. What do you think about his?
Well, I'm a big fan of the president, and I really like the president. The fact is, a lot of the policies that were so hurtful were done prior to the Reagan administration. And for instance, with the Russians and the wheat, we have the boycott of the Russian wheat, of the wheat all of a sudden. Well, let me say that again, and I'll give it a little better. I'm a big fan of the president, but the problem that you have in many cases has been caused prior to President Reagan. When you had the boycott of the Russians with respect to wheat, they went out and they found that other countries can sell wheat to them cheaper, and they never really came back to the extent that we had them originally. It was a faulty decision. There are decisions now being made that are faulty. You have to change the policies of the country so that the farmers can survive. They don't have to really flourish in the true sense, because in 2 or 3 or 4 years, if we can keep them going, they'll be successful. You can look at an example of Chrysler and what happened to Chrysler. Chrysler was a company that was in serious trouble. They helped them, and now they're flourishing. The fact is that that's going to have to happen with the farms. The farms are the backbone of this country, and we can't afford to lose all of these farms. Times will get better for the farmer, but in the meantime, we have to help them so that they can survive.
If I could, I love what you just said. If you could just condense the part with Chrysler and then liaison into the farms, but just a little bit shorter, because it'd be hard to
Shorter
cut
on Chrysler?
No, starting off with.
An example would be Chrysler. Chrysler goes out and they need money and they need help, and Lee Iacocca did a wonderful job, and Chrysler is saved. With all of the thousands of jobs, Chrysler is saved. There were those people that didn't want to save Chrysler. Now we have a very similar situation, except a much larger one with the farms. The farms need help during this period of time. In 3 years or 4 years, the farmers are probably going to be fine, but they have to get over this hurdle, and they need help, and they need federal help, and they need it immediately.
Okay, Beth, I have a question for you, if we could stop for just a second. I want to know if there's anything about this family situation. It's a 4-generational family on the farm. If you find anything that speaks to you personally about this family.
Well, I see the family as being a very important element in our society, and when you have 4 generations of families on that same farm, the Hill family, the grandfather, the great-grandfather, and the father, and all of a sudden they're losing that farm, that incredible farm. To them it's incredible. To you and I it's not so incredible perhaps, but to them it's incredible. And they're losing this farm, and the gentleman goes out, and in order to try and save the farm, he commits suicide. That shows you how important that whole structure is, and it shows you how important, in a sense, the whole family structure is to that family and to the farmer in general. A man is willing to commit suicide in order to save the farm for the rest of his family. It's very tragic. This is a very tragic story.
And I know your father was in the real estate business, and you're in the real estate business.
Right.
Do you see the continuum as being important?
I think it's important that people do things that are productive for the country, and there's probably nothing more productive for this country than the farming business and the agricultural business. And if through government policy those people just aren't able to financially make it right now, something has to be done to try and get them over this hurdle, to allow them to make it.
Okay. It seems like half the country is doing very well, and half the country is really suffering. Do you think this heightens a larger economic problem that we have in the country overall, or is this a temporary situation?
The half of the country that's doing well today perhaps won't be doing well in 5 years from now or 2 years from now. The farming half of the country that's doing badly perhaps we'll be doing very well in 2 or 3 years from now. And relating to this problem, this is why these farms have to be saved right now, because they'll be back. But if we don't save them now, there'll be nothing that can come back. There won't be farms to come back, and it's a real problem.
So how did you actually get involved? You saw it on television. You haven't been to Georgia, or have you?
I have not been to Georgia. I watched this tragic event taking place. I've read about it. I've seen it on television. And it just captivated my attention, to be perfectly honest. I saw a lovely woman whose farm was going to be, after generations, whose farm was going to be auctioned off. A fantastic woman whose husband had committed suicide in order to try and save the farm effectively. And I just said, that's a pretty important part of life to these people, and I wanted to see if I could help.
Excellent. One last question. Do you think that your critics, or perhaps those who envy you, will find it unusual that a New York real estate developer is bailing out a country farm? What do you think?
I don't know what critics would say. I would think that the critics should really make contributions to the farmers, and they should try and help the farmers, because the farmers aren't the only problems right now in the country. They're not the only ones suffering from problems in the country, but certainly their problem is a very large one, and it's a tragic one in many cases, such as this. So I think that people ought to get on the bandwagon and try and help people like Mrs. Hill and so many thousands of others.
Good. Okay, if we can stop for a second, I'm just going to... We rolling?
Yep.
Can you tell me just a little bit more specifically about what you did to prevent the auction that was to occur today?
Well, we made phone calls, and we called the various representatives from the banks to everybody else, and we made sure the auction wasn't going to take place today. I made a contribution which effectively is going to pay down the mortgage and pay down some of the debt that the Hill family has. And that's basically what we did, and I'm very happy about it.
How far are you willing to go as far as getting involved financially with the Hill family?
Well, we'll help the Hill family. This is not a problem that's a very major problem relative to the economic terms of some of the things that I've been involved in. Well, I'll phrase that differently.
Mm-hmm.
Let me phrase that a little bit more concisely for you. In a purely individual economic sense, relative to Manhattan and to the world of large business, the Hill family is not suffering a large problem, because the money involved is not very significant compared to the kinds of money that you see in Manhattan and the great towers of Manhattan and everything else. So we'll have absolutely no problem solving Mrs. Hill's problem. The real problem does come in with the overall mass majority of the farmers that are losing everything today, and that's the thing that hopefully, perhaps using this to serve as a catalyst, I mean, that to me is almost as important, and it's actually more important than the one individual family, and I'm sure that Mrs. Hill would agree with that. Getting the overall problem solved for this tremendous majority of farmers that are losing everything today.
If you could condense that, that would be fabulous.
Okay, okay.
Relating it to Manhattan and the towers.
Okay. In Manhattan, the kinds of numbers and the kinds of economics in the great office towers and the great towers are so far greater than the kinds of numbers involved in trying to help Mrs. Hill save her farm. So we'll save Mrs. Hill's farm, but I just hope that this can serve as a catalyst so that not only Mrs. Hill's farm can be saved, but so that all of the other farmers, the thousands throughout the country, so that their farms can be saved also.
Excellent. Stop 1 second. That is, we spend a lot of money on other things. Do you think the money would be better spent on the farmers? And where do you think the money might come from?
We spend billions and billions of dollars to other countries, give it to them. Other countries that, number one, they can't stand the United States. They squander the money. They're crooked as can be in many cases. And yet the farmer in this country is going bankrupt. And I wish that instead of giving money to Mrs. Marcos, I wish that instead of giving money to various other people and groups that you read so often about, I wish that we'd be able to give the money to the farmers of this country and to others in this country that really are much more deserving of the money.
Great. Okay, that should do.
Little controversial, step in the right direction.
Yeah. In Washington, Beth was telling me they always make them do a reverse shot so that they do get in it. But our producers generally don't use those shots.
But
Yeah,
Thursday,
probably. I'm sure
Thursday at about
we cover
10:30
it.
in Trump Tower.
Thursday,
Downstairs.
10:30,
Have it downstairs in the atrium someplace.
atrium, Trump Tower. I'll tell her. I'm sure Simon Dust knows about it, but I'll tell him. We'll surely have a crew here.